It's funny the things you get passionate about. For some people, it's vintage cars, or baseball stats, or knitting. For me, it was unsolved mysteries. The kind of stories that get under your skin and stay there. The ones with jagged edges that don't quite fit into a neat little box. I had a podcast, nothing famous. Just a passion project I ran out of my small apartment in Portland. It was called Fading Echoes, and I dedicated it to those very stories. I'd spend weeks, sometimes months, digging into cold cases, trying to give a voice to people the world had forgotten. And there was no case more haunting, more incomplete, than that of Elisa Lam. This all happened back in the fall of 2023. I'd been running the podcast for about 2 years, and I was hitting a bit of a wall. The downloads were flat, and honestly, my enthusiasm was starting to wane. I needed something big, something that I could really sink my teeth into. That's when I decided to tackle the Cecil Hotel, or as it's called now, the Hotel Stay on Main. A new name can't scrub away old sins. Though, everyone knows what it is. The Cecil is a place that seems to collect tragedies like a magnet collects iron filings. It's got a history so dark it makes you wonder if the very bricks are soaked in misery. Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, lived there during his killing spree. Jack Unterweger, another serial killer, stayed there, likely because he felt a kinship with Ramirez's ghost. The Black Dahlia was supposedly seen drinking at its bar shortly before her gruesome murder. It's a place where people go to disappear, literally and figuratively. But the story that always got me was Elisa's. The 21-year-old student, found in a water tank on the hotel roof. The last known sighting of her was that elevator footage. I'm sure you've seen it. It's 4 minutes of pure, uncut psychological horror. The way she presses all the buttons, peeks out into the hallway, hides back in the corner, her hands moving in strange, disjointed gestures. The elevator door itself, refusing to close, as if something, or someone, was holding it open just out of frame. The official story was an accident, a tragic consequence of a bipolar episode. But it never sat right with me. It didn't answer the big questions. How did she get onto a locked, alarmed roof? How did she get inside a sealed, 20-foot-tall water tank and close the heavy lid from the inside? It felt like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. For my podcast, I wanted to go beyond the internet theories. I wanted to walk the same hallways she walked, to stand in the same elevator. I wanted to feel the place. I thought if I could just put myself in her shoes, maybe I could find one of those missing pieces. It was a stupid, arrogant idea, and it almost cost me my life. I booked a 2-week stay. I told my friends I was going to LA for a research trip. Which was true. I just omitted the part about staying in a place with a body count higher than some small towns. Flying in, the city looked like a circuit board of sprawling light. It felt exciting. The dread didn't start until I was standing in front of the building itself. The Stay on Main is on Main Street, a stone's throw from the part of downtown LA they call Skid Row. The grand, Beaux-Arts lobby you see in old photos is a ghost of its former self. The marble is cracked. The gilded trim is tarnished, and the air hangs thick with the smell of industrial cleaner and something else, something old and musty. Like damp, forgotten laundry, it smelled like decay. The guy at the front desk was a study in absolute indifference. He had tired eyes and a name tag that just said, Leo. He didn't even blink when I told him my reservation. I'd specifically requested a room on the 14th floor, the same floor Elisa had stayed on. He just grunted, slid a key card across the counter, and went back to scrolling on his phone. Enjoy your stay, he mumbled, without looking up. The elevator bank was just past the lobby. There were 4 of them, set in a dark, wood-paneled alcove. The call button felt greasy to the touch. When one of the elevators arrived, it did so with a shuddering groan, and the doors scraped open to reveal a cramped, coffin-sized box with flickering fluorescent lights. The air inside was stale and warm. I stepped in and pressed the button for floor 14. The doors rattled shut, and with another lurch, we began to ascend. It was slow, painfully slow. I could hear the cables straining, the whole rickety car swaying slightly in the shaft. I remember thinking, for the podcast, that I should record this sound. I pulled out my phone. But as I fumbled with the voice memo app, The elevator stopped. I looked at the panel. The number 7 was lit up. I hadn't pressed it. The doors slid open to an empty, dimly lit hallway. The wallpaper was a faded, floral pattern, and the carpet was a mess of brown and orange swirls that probably looked fashionable in 1978. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and thin. Silence. The kind of heavy silence that feels like it's pressing in on you. I stood there for a moment, waiting. Nobody got on. Nobody was there. After about 30 seconds, which felt like an eternity, the doors slowly scraped shut again, and the elevator continued its groaning ascent. Old wiring, I told myself. The place is ancient, bound to have glitches. It was the first time I made an excuse for the hotel. It wouldn't be the last. My room was 1402. It was at the very end of a long, narrow hallway. The walk there felt unnervingly long. The lights in the hall were motion activated, so they'd flicker on one by one as I walked, illuminating a short stretch of the hideous carpet in front of me while the space behind me plunged back into shadow. It felt like the darkness was chasing me down the hall. The room itself was depressingly basic. A double bed with a thin, scratchy-looking bedspread, a small wooden desk bolted to the wall, a bulky old television, and a single window that looked out onto a grimy brick wall of the adjacent building. The bathroom was tiny, with a shower stall, a toilet, and a sink. The first thing I noticed was the water pressure. When I turned on the tap, the water came out in a weak, brownish trickle before clearing up. It had a strange, metallic taste. I made a mental note to only drink bottled water. For the first few days, things were almost normal. I settled into a routine. In the mornings, I'd go out with my recording equipment, interviewing people in the neighborhood, trying to get a feel for the area's history. Most people didn't want to talk about the Cecil. It was a dark spot, a place they'd rather forget. I spent the afternoons in my room, transcribing interviews, outlining the podcast episode, and going down internet rabbit holes. But the hotel was always there, a constant, low-level hum of weirdness in the background. The first real red flag, as I'd later call it in my notes, happened on the third night. I was at my desk, headphones on, reviewing some audio I'd recorded. I took the headphones off to stretch, and that's when I heard it, a faint sound, coming from the room next door. It sounded like someone crying. Soft, muffled sobs. I froze, listening. It was late, probably 2 a.m. The crying would continue for a few seconds, then stop, then start again. It was a sound of profound grief. I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a prickle of fear. The hotel had a lot of long-term, low-income residents. You never knew what kind of desperation was living just one thin wall away. The next morning, out of a mix of concern and journalistic curiosity, I went to the front desk. Leo was there, looking just as bored as he had on the first day. "Hi," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just a quick question. The people in the room next to me, in 1404? I heard some crying last night. I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." Leo didn't even look up from his crossword puzzle. "There's no one in 1404, he said flatly. "Or 1406. Whole end of that hall is empty. Except for you." My blood went cold. "Are you sure?" He finally looked at me, his eyes devoid of any emotion. "Lady, I work here 10 hours a day. I know who's checked in. That wing is empty." I walked back to the elevator in a daze. He must be mistaken, I thought. Or maybe the sound was coming from another floor. Sound travels weirdly in old buildings. Another excuse. I was getting good at them. That night, the crying didn't return. Instead, it was the elevator again. I was coming back from getting a late dinner. I got into the car, pressed 14, and the doors closed. But it didn't move. I waited. Nothing. I pressed the button again. Still nothing. The door open button. The door close button. None of them responded. The alarm button. I stared at it for a long time. It felt like admitting defeat. Finally, I pressed it. A hideously loud, buzzing noise filled the car. But nothing else happened. I was trapped. Panic started to bubble up in my chest. My heart was hammering. I started banging on the door, yelling for help. My voice just sounded swallowed by the silence of the shaft. After what felt like an hour, it was probably only 5 minutes. The elevator gave a violent jolt, throwing me against the wall. And then it started moving. But it didn't go up. It went down, all the way down to the basement. The doors opened into a dark, concrete cavern that smelled of mildew and damp earth. A single, bare bulb cast long, dancing shadows. There were old, discarded pieces of furniture covered in white sheets, looking like a graveyard of forgotten guests. I had no desire to explore. I frantically jabbed the button for the lobby. And thank God, this time the doors closed and the elevator ascended properly. When I finally stumbled back into the lobby, Leo was gone. A different, older night clerk was there. He looked up, startled, as I burst out of the elevator. The elevator is broken, I gasped, out of breath. It took me to the basement. He just gave me a tired, pitying look. Yeah, they do that sometimes, he said, as if talking about a moody pet. Just gotta wait it out. They get their wires crossed. The casualness of his response was almost more terrifying than the event itself. This wasn't an anomaly. This was just Tuesday at the Cecil. Back in my room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I triple-checked the lock on my door. I wedged my desk chair under the handle, a flimsy barricade that offered more psychological comfort than actual security. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the old building, every distant siren, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept thinking about that dark, silent basement. The next day, I decided I needed to get to the roof. It felt like the whole point of my trip. If I could just see the water tanks, maybe I could understand. The guest access door to the roof was, as expected, locked and alarmed, but I'd read online about another way. A fire escape that ran up the back of the building. It was a risky, stupid plan, but I was becoming obsessed. My journalistic curiosity curdling into something darker, more compulsive. I felt like the hotel was challenging me, daring me to uncover its secrets. I found the fire escape at the end of the 10th floor hallway. The window was old and warped, but with a lot of effort, I managed to shove it open. The fire escape was a rusty, skeletal thing, bolted precariously to the brickwork. The wind whipped around me as I climbed, the metal groaning under my weight. 4 stories felt like 40. When I finally pulled myself onto the flat, gravelly surface of the roof, my heart was pounding from both exertion and fear. And then, I saw them. The 4 large, black water tanks. They stood there like silent, cylindrical tombs against the hazy LA skyline. They were bigger than I'd imagined, maybe 15 or 20 feet tall, with heavy-looking metal lids. An overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. This was the place. This was where Elisa Lam had taken her last breath. I walked towards the tank she was found in, the one furthest to the left. There was a crude ladder welded to the side. I felt a morbid pull to climb it, to look inside, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The very air around it felt cold, heavy with a sorrow that was almost palpable. I spent about an hour on the roof, taking pictures, recording audio notes, trying to absorb the atmosphere. The sun began to set, painting the smoggy sky in shades of orange and purple. It was beautiful, in a bleak, urban sort of way. As I was about to leave, my eyes caught something, tucked away behind the base of a different water tank, almost completely obscured by shadows, was a small, metal maintenance hatch, set into the rooftop itself. It looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. It was rusted almost completely shut. But there was a small gap, and wedged into that gap, protected from the elements, was a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and secured with rotting twine. My hands trembled as I worked it free. It was surprisingly heavy. I unwrapped the oilcloth, my fingers numb with a mixture of cold and anticipation. Inside was an old, black VHS cassette tape. There was a small, faded label on its spine, with one word written in shaky, handwritten print. Elisa. I stared at it, my mind reeling. Elisa? It couldn't be. The police would have found this. It had to be a different Elisa. A prank. A coincidence. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. The hotel had given me a secret. Getting back to my room felt like a dream. I clutched the tape to my chest like a holy relic. The immediate problem, of course, was that it was 2023. I didn't have a VCR. The bulky TV in my room was an old CRT model, but it only had a coaxial input. The next day became a bizarre quest. I A podcaster investigating a potential supernatural murder was wandering around downtown Los Angeles trying to find a working VCR. I finally found one in a dusty, cluttered pawn shop. The owner, a man with a gold tooth and suspicious eyes, sold it to me for $20, along with the necessary cables. Back in my room, I felt a new kind of fear. The fear of the unknown. What was on this tape? Did I even want to know? My journalistic instincts warred with my primal survival instinct. The journalist won. I hooked up the VCR to the old TV. The hum of the machine powering on was deafening in the silent room. I slid the tape into the slot. The VCR whirred, clunked, and then the TV screen flickered from blue to a wash of static. For a moment, I thought it was a blank tape. A dud. But then, an image swam into focus. It was a room. My room. The perspective was from a camera set on the desk, pointing towards the bed and the door. The quality was terrible, grainy, washed out, with tracking lines rolling down the screen. A date stamp in the bottom corner read February 4, 2013. 12 days before Elisa Lam's body was discovered. A young woman walked into the frame. She had long, dark hair and was wearing a university sweatshirt. She looked tired, but her eyes were bright, intelligent. She sat on the edge of the bed, the exact bed I had been sleeping in. Okay, video diary. Day 3, she said, her voice slightly tinny through the TV speakers. I'm still not sure what to make of this place. The history is overwhelming. I came here to write a paper on urban decay and its psychological impact. Using the Cecil as a case study, she let out a dry laugh. I think the hotel might be having a psychological impact on me. I sat frozen on the floor, my blood turning to ice. This wasn't Elisa Lam. The name on the tape wasn't her name. It was a warning. Elisa in Spanish. My name is. The girl on the tape continued. Her name was Clara. She was a sociology student from Vancouver. For the next hour of the tape, I watched her document her stay. She was smart, articulate, and methodical, and she was describing my exact experience. The elevator is a legitimate hazard, she said on day 4, her voice laced with nervous energy. It has a mind of its own. It keeps taking me to the 7th floor. There's never anyone there. A few days later, I keep hearing things at night. Last night it was a woman crying. The front desk swears the rooms next to me are empty. I'm starting to feel like I'm losing my mind. I watched, mesmerized and horrified, as her academic detachment slowly crumbled, replaced by a creeping paranoia that mirrored my own. She started looking haggard. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. She talked about the feeling of being watched in the hallways, about objects in her room being moved when she was out. It feels like a game, she whispered to the camera around the 1-hour mark. Her eyes kept darting towards the door, like it's testing me, pushing me, seeing how far I'll go. Then, the tape's tone shifted. It became frantic. The last 20 minutes were a collection of short, disjointed clips. Clara, hiding in the bathroom, the camera shaking in her hands. It's in the water, she whispered, her voice cracking. I can hear it in the pipes. It's not just the building. It's hungry. The next clip was shot in the hallway. She was running, the camera bouncing wildly, capturing blurry images of the faded wallpaper. There was no one chasing her, but she was running as if her life depended on it. And then, the final segment, the one that will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The camera was on the floor of the elevator. The view was angled up, showing Clara in the corner. It was the same elevator car. She was terrified, jabbing at the button panel. The buttons were all lit up. The door was open, refusing to close. She peeked out into the hallway, then jumped back in, pressing herself against the wall. She wasn't talking. Her mouth was moving, but no sound was coming out. And her hands, she was gesturing, just like Elisa Lam in the viral video, waving her hands, twisting her fingers, as if communicating with someone, or something, that was standing just out of sight, holding the door open. It wasn't a game of peek-a-boo. I realized with a sickening lurch what it was. She was pleading, bargaining. Suddenly, she looked directly into the camera on the floor. Her face was a mask of pure, absolute terror. Her eyes were wide, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. It's a cycle, she mouthed, the words lost in the VCR's hiss. It needs a witness. Then she bolted from the elevator. The camera was left behind, recording the empty car. For a full minute, there was only the sound of static and the low hum of the elevator. Then, a new sound began, the faint sound of splashing water, and a scraping sound, like heavy metal being dragged across concrete. The sound was coming from above, from the roof. The tape cut to black. I sat there on the floor of room 1402. The silence of the room a crushing weight. The hum of the VCR had stopped. My limbs were numb. My brain was trying to process what I had just seen. It's a cycle. It needs a witness. Clara wasn't the first. The name on the tape, Elisa, wasn't referring to Elisa Lam. It was the Spanish instruction. Read this. A message in a bottle, left by the victim before her. A warning for the next one in line. Clara found a tape from someone before her. Elisa Lam must have found Clara's tape. And the hotel had led me right to Elisa's. It wasn't a ghost haunting a hotel. The hotel was the entity. A predatory consciousness that lured in the curious. The investigators. The ones who wanted to solve its puzzles. It played with them, broke them down, and then it fed, and it made sure the next victim would find the story of the last. To perpetuate the legend, to bait the next hook. My podcast, Fading Echoes, was the perfect bait. A sudden, intense cold filled the room, seeping into my bones. It felt like a freezer door had been swung open. The old television, which had been off, flickered to life, displaying a screen of roaring static. Then I heard it, the sound of running water, starting in the pipes in the bathroom wall. Not the weak trickle from the faucet, but a powerful, gushing sound, the sound of a massive tank being filled. My head snapped towards the door. The brass handle began to jiggle, slowly at first, then more violently, rattling in its socket. Thump, a soft, heavy sound against the door, like someone had leaned their full body weight against it. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't a knock, it was an impact, and it was getting stronger. The wooden door frame groaned. I was paralyzed. Every horror movie trope, every rational thought, evaporated into pure, animal terror. My body knew, on a cellular level, that what was on the other side of that door was not human. The chair wedged under the handle splintered with a loud crack. That was the sound that broke the spell. I didn't scream. I didn't think. I moved. I scrambled backwards, away from the door, grabbing my phone, my car keys, and the VHS tape. I left everything else. My laptop with all my research, my clothes, my recording equipment, none of it mattered. I ran to the window. The one that looked out onto the brick wall. My only other way out was the fire escape. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grasp it. The thumping on the door was louder now. A rhythmic, deafening boom that shook the whole room. The window finally flew open. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself out onto the rusty platform, my feet slipping on the cold metal. I didn't look back. I scrambled down the fire escape, my breath catching in ragged sobs. Every step was a prayer. I expected to feel a cold hand grab my ankle, to be pulled back into the darkness. When my feet hit the solid ground of the alleyway, I ran. I ran like I had never run in my life. I burst out onto the street, a chaotic blur of headlights and noise. I didn't stop until I reached my car, parked several blocks away in a dimly lit garage. I jammed the key in the ignition, my hands still shaking. The engine turned over. I threw the car in reverse, squealing out of the parking spot, and drove. I had no destination. I just drove east, away from the coast, away from that building. I didn't look in my rearview mirror. I was too afraid of what I might see in the back seat. I drove for 10 hours straight, stopping only for gas, until the sun came up over the Arizona desert. I checked into a bright, clean, sterile chain motel and locked myself in the room. I did what you're supposed to do. I called the Los Angeles Police Department. I tried to explain, my voice trembling, what had happened. I told them about the tape, about Clara, about the cycle. I'm sure they thought I was crazy. Another drug-addled tourist with a story about the Cecil. They took my statement with a weary sigh. I sent them a digitized version of the tape that I made on my phone before I left. A week later, a detective called me back. He sounded bored. He said they'd checked the hotel. There was no sign of a forced entry into my room. They'd looked into the name Clara Vester, No record of her ever existed. No student by that name attended the university she mentioned. No missing person report matched her description. The tape, he said, was too corrupted to be definitive. The visual data was just a series of blurs and static. A matrixing error, he called it. He said what I probably found was a damaged home movie from the 80s and my overactive imagination did the rest. He politely suggested I seek some counseling. I never released the episode. I shut down the Fading Echoes podcast the next day. I couldn't bring myself to tell these stories anymore, because I knew one of them was true. I moved back to my parents' house in Ohio. I can't be alone at night. I can't take elevators. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, I can still hear the sound of running water in the walls. I still have the tape. It sits in a shoebox in the back of my closet. I've never watched it again. But I can't bring myself to destroy it. It feels like a betrayal of Clara. And of Elisa. And of God knows how many others came before them. Sometimes, late at night, a terrible thought occurs to me. The hotel needs a witness. It needs a story to be told. To lure the next curious soul. Clara left her tape for Elisa. Elisa left her tape for me. And I left all of my equipment. My laptop, my audio recorders, filled with my voice, my theories, my growing terror. I left the perfect trail. A brand new mystery. The story of the podcaster who stayed at the Cecil Hotel and then just disappeared. I got away, but the cycle isn't broken. The hotel has its story. And right now, somewhere out there, I know another curious person is reading about my case, packing their bags, and getting ready to go looking for answers. The hotel is just waiting for them. It's a patient hunter, and it's always hungry.